There is a photograph taken in 1867. It sits in the archive of the Austrian Imperial Survey Commission, or rather, it sat there until the archive was reorganized in 1912, and this particular folder was reassigned to a subcategory labeled simply Miscellaneous Technical Documentation. The photograph shows a building in what is now central Bosnia. The structure has no name attached to it in the caption, no architect credited, no date of construction. The caption reads in faded German script, "Pre-existing load-bearing structure retained for municipal use." Pre-existing. That word, pre-existing, not built, not constructed, not erected, pre-existing, as if the surveyor had simply run out of verbs, or more precisely, had chosen the most bureaucratic, the most inert, the most administratively bloodless way to describe something he did not understand and was not paid to question. Now look at the photograph carefully. The building has walls that are 2.4 meters at the base. The window apertures are perfectly symmetrical, not by visual approximation, but geometrically, mathematically symmetrical, verified by the grid overlay that the Survey Commission itself drew onto the image. The arches follow a curve that modern structural engineers recognize as a catenary, the precise shape a hanging chain forms under its own weight, the same curve Gaudí spent decades calculating by hand for the Sagrada Familia. Except this building in Bosnia is not Gaudí. There is no architect, there is no name, there is only that word, pre-existing. This is where the investigation begins. Not with spectacle, not with sensation, with a single word in a bureaucratic caption, and the slow, patient realization that someone, somewhere, made a decision that this word was sufficient, that nothing more needed to be said, that the origin of this structure did not require documentation because its origin did not, officially, need to exist. Feel the weight of that. Feel it the way you would feel the weight of those walls, 2.4 meters of stone, carrying a load they were designed to carry long before anyone in the Austrian Survey Commission was born. We inherit a past that was edited before we arrived. Here is what we were taught. Human civilization followed a clean, ascending arc. Mesopotamia gave us writing. Greece gave us philosophy. Rome gave us law. The Dark Ages interrupted the signal. 1,000 years of silence, rough stone, superstition. Then the Renaissance, a sudden, inexplicable flowering of art and architecture. Then the Enlightenment. Then the Industrial Revolution. Then us. It is a satisfying story. It has a shape. It has momentum. Every century improves on the last. Each generation stands on the shoulders of the one before, and the whole edifice of progress stretches upward in a clean diagonal line from the cave to the smartphone. But here is a question that this story cannot answer cleanly. If the arc of human construction skill was genuinely ascending, if we were, generation by generation, learning to build better, learning to calculate better, learning to engineer better, then why do the oldest surviving structures routinely outperform the newest ones built in the same materials? This is not a rhetorical provocation. It is a technical observation. The Pantheon in Rome, completed in 125 AD, has a concrete dome that spans 43.3 meters. For 1,300 years, it was the largest concrete dome on Earth. When engineers in the 19th century finally surpassed it, they used steel reinforcement, a fundamentally different material technology. No one in 1,300 years of supposed architectural progress managed to equal that dome in concrete alone. The standard explanation, Roman concrete used pozzolana, a volcanic ash unavailable elsewhere, a local material advantage. Fine, accept that. But then explain this. The acoustic properties of the Greek theater at Epidaurus, built in the 4th century BC, have been studied extensively by acoustic engineers from the Georgia Institute of Technology. Their conclusion, published in peer-reviewed literature, was that the seating geometry filters low-frequency noise, crowd noise, wind, the rumble of the earth, while selectively amplifying frequencies in the range of the human voice. The effect is not accidental. The limestone seating achieves this through a precisely calculated resonant geometry. A geometry, by the way, that the Romans, who conquered Greece and absorbed its culture, did not replicate in a single subsequent theater they built. Why not? If you inherited the knowledge, why didn't you use it? Unless what you inherited was the structure, but not the knowledge of why the structure worked. Let us stop talking about architecture as art for a moment. Let us talk about it as engineering, as functional systems, as structures that were designed with intention to do specific physical things to the environment and to the human bodies inside them. When sound enters a large enclosed space, it does not simply bounce, it accumulates. Frequencies interact. Certain geometries cause waves to reinforce each other, constructive interference, producing what engineers call resonance. Resonant frequencies in architectural spaces are not decorative phenomena. They are physical. They exert measurable pressure on the human chest. They influence heart rate. They alter breathing patterns. In frequencies below 20 Hz, infrasound, they can produce sensations of unease, of presence, of something that earlier civilizations would have described as sacred, or terrible, or divine. Researcher Yegor Reznikov spent years studying the acoustic properties of Paleolithic cave paintings. His finding? The densest concentrations of painted images in caves like Lascaux and Fond de Gaume correspond with striking consistency to locations of maximum resonance inside the cave, locations where the rock itself amplifies sound, where a single voice produces a feedback of overwhelming physical force. The painters were not choosing walls for their flatness or their light. They were choosing them for their resonance. This is not symbolism. This is functional architecture. This is an engineered relationship between human biology and physical space. Now, carry that principle forward. The great cathedrals of Europe, Chartres, Cologne, Notre-Dame de Paris, have been analyzed for their acoustic properties. The results are consistent. These structures create resonant profiles that specifically amplify the frequency range of Gregorian chant. The vaulted ceiling heights, the nave widths, the stone compositions, they are tuned with the same intentionality that a modern acoustic engineer brings to a concert hall. But here is the problem. Here is the thing that does not fit the official version. We have extensive documentation of Gothic cathedral construction. We have master masons' notebooks, guild records, correspondence between bishops and builders. We have, in other words, a paper trail. And in that paper trail, there is not a single reference to acoustic calculation, not one measurement of resonant frequency, not one notation that reads, increase nave height by 3 meters to improve chant amplification. The builders, in their own words, were working from tradition, from habit, from what had been done before and was understood to work. The functional architecture existed. The engineering knowledge, the explicit, articulable, transmissible knowledge of why it worked, did not exist in the period we assign the construction. Where, then, did the tradition come from? The answer most commonly offered is, it developed organically, by trial and error over centuries of building. But trial and error requires iteration. Iteration requires time. Chartres Cathedral was built between 1194 and 1220, 26 years. The acoustic properties of its nave are not the result of trial and error within that construction period. They are the result of someone knowing with precision what they were building before they built it. Someone knew, but the record of their knowing was not preserved, or was not permitted to be preserved.
Now, step back. Step back far enough that individual buildings stop being individual buildings and start being data points. Between 1800 and 1850, something happened to the world's relationship with its own architectural past. This is not a theory. This is a pattern visible in administrative records across 3 continents, in the founding documents of national museums, in the charters of academic institutions, in the language of colonial surveys. In 1820, the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris formalized a curriculum for architectural education that explicitly classified pre-Renaissance construction as pre-rational, the work of intuition and faith, not calculation. This classification was not a neutral observation, it was an administrative decision. It determined what would be studied, what would be funded, what would be considered knowledge versus what would be considered folklore. In 1835, the British Museum reorganized its collection of antiquities. The reorganization introduced a chronological taxonomy, Stone Age, Bronze Age, Iron Age, that has become so foundational to our thinking that we no longer notice it as a taxonomy, a human choice about how to categorize rather than a natural feature of the past itself. The man who created it, Christian Jurgensen Thompson, was a museum administrator, not an archaeologist, a museum administrator making an administrative decision about how the past would be organized and therefore understood. In 1841, the first professional school of archaeology was established in Athens. Its founding charter specified that excavations required state licensing. That licensing required that findings be reported to a central registry, that the central registry had the authority to determine what was published, what was retained, and what was described as insufficiently significant for broader dissemination. In 1847, the Smithsonian Institution was founded in Washington. Its first director, Joseph Henry, issued a policy statement that remains remarkable in its clarity. He wrote that the institution's primary mission was the organization of existing knowledge, not the creation of new knowledge, but the organization of what was already known. The distinction, in practice, meant that Henry controlled which interpretations of evidence were institutionally sanctioned. In Mexico, in India, in Egypt, in the Ottoman territories, the same decade, the same pattern. The establishment of centralized institutions with the authority to define what the past meant, not to discover the past, to define it. This is not coincidence distributed across geography. This is synchronization. And synchronized processes do not emerge from independent, parallel development. They emerge from shared conditions, shared pressures, shared incentives, or shared instructions. The 1800 to 1850 period was the high watermark of European colonial expansion. It was the period in which the administrative infrastructure of the modern world, the census, the registry, the archive, the museum, the licensed excavation, was built simultaneously across the globe. And in building that infrastructure, something else was built simultaneously, the official version.
Understand something important before we continue. Administrative erasure does not look like destruction. It does not look like fire. It does not look like censorship in the dramatic sense, the index of banned books, the public burning, the midnight raid. Administrative erasure looks like reorganization. It looks like a folder relabeled miscellaneous technical documentation. It looks like an archive transferred to a new institution under new taxonomic rules, where the old categories no longer have a home, and the documents that belong to them are reassigned to boxes that no one will think to open. It looks like a grant committee
that funds excavations in documented sites but declines to fund survey work in regions that have not yet been mapped, because unmapped regions, by definition, cannot produce findings that fit the existing framework. It looks like a name change. Between 1800 and 1900, hundreds of geographic regions across Europe, Asia, and the Americas were renamed, not just colloquially, administratively. The old names were struck from official maps, replaced with names that referenced the new colonial or national administrative structure rather than the pre-existing cultural or geographic identity. When a place loses its name, it does not merely lose a label, it loses its relationships. The documents that referred to it by the old name no longer link cleanly to the documents that use the new name. The library catalog cannot connect them. The researcher looking for information about the place under its new name will not find the documents filed under its old name, not because those documents were destroyed, but because the administrative bridge between them was never built. This is the mechanism. This is how information survives physically and vanishes functionally. There is a specific example worth pausing on. The Tartaria tablets, discovered in Romania in 1961, they are symbols that predate the earliest Sumerian writing by over a millennium if the dating is accepted. The dating was contested. The contest followed a specific pattern. The initial carbon-14 dating was challenged. Alternative interpretations of the symbols were proposed. The original researcher, Nikolai Vlasa, died before the debate was resolved, and subsequent access to the tablets for independent analysis was restricted by the Romanian National Museum that held them. I am not claiming a deliberate act of suppression in this specific case. I am noting the structure of the outcome. The information entered a contested zone and was absorbed into institutional ambiguity from which it has never emerged. The tablets exist. The debate continues. No resolution has been funded or pursued to completion. This is what administrative erasure looks like at the individual scale. Multiply it across thousands of sites, thousands of contested findings, thousands of researchers whose conclusions did not fit the official chronology, and you begin to understand not a conspiracy, but a system with incentives, with institutional gravity, with the natural tendency of any organized body to protect the coherence of its own framework. Systems do not need malice, they only need momentum.
There is one more layer to this investigation, and it is the most intimate. We have spoken about buildings, about archives, about administrative decisions made in offices by men in the 19th century. But the record of what was erased is not only in stone and paper, it is in bone. Physical anthropology, the study of human skeletal remains, has for the past century operated on a framework of population continuity. The assumption the people buried in a location are the ancestors of the people living there now. Culture changes, language changes, politics changes, but populations at the biological level are assumed to be stable unless there is dramatic evidence of migration or conquest. Recent ancient DNA analysis has disrupted this assumption with a force that has not yet fully propagated through the historical mainstream. The Yamnaya expansion, a massive migration out of the Pontic steppe beginning approximately 5,000 years ago, replaced a substantial proportion of the Western European genetic heritage within a period of centuries. This is not a marginal finding. It is a finding that rewrites the biological history of the continent. But here is what is equally significant and less discussed. The people who were replaced, the people whose genetic legacy was substantially overwritten, left behind megalithic monuments, Stonehenge, the passage tombs of Ireland, the dolmens of Brittany, that their replacers did not continue building. The architectural tradition ended, the biological marker changed,
and the knowledge embedded in the tradition, the resonance geometry, the astronomical alignment, the functional architecture, was not transmitted. Not because it was hidden, because the people who held it were no longer there. This is a different kind of erasure, not administrative, demographic. The loss of a lineage is the loss of everything that lineage carried: the embodied knowledge, the oral tradition, the specific way of reading a landscape and understanding what a hill or a stone or the angle of winter light could tell you about how to position a structure for maximum resonance. When we look at the gap between the sophistication of prehistoric monuments and the knowledge that medieval builders had of why those monuments worked, we are looking at the downstream consequence of a demographic event thousands of years in the past. The 19th century administrative erasure was, in some ways, the second layer. The first layer was biological. The second was institutional. Between them, they produced us, people living in and surrounded by the echoes of a technical intelligence we can measure but cannot explain and cannot reproduce.
Close your eyes for a moment. Not metaphorically, actually close them. Think about the city you live in. Think about its oldest buildings, the ones built before living memory, before photographs, before the period when documentation became systematic. Think about what it would mean if those buildings were not built by the civilization that claims them, but were inherited, adopted, repurposed, filled with new names and new functions, their origins quietly filed under miscellaneous technical documentation. Think about what it would mean if the oldest structures in your city were not the oldest things in your city. If beneath them, under the foundations, in the layer of soil that no licensed excavation has been funded to examine, there were traces of something earlier. Something with different walls, a different geometry, a different understanding of what a building is for. Think about the fact that cities throughout history have almost universally been built on top of previous cities, not beside them, not nearby, on top of. That the rubble of what came before becomes the foundation of what comes next. That the stones are reused, the wells are deepened, the streets follow paths established by whoever walked them first. Think about what that means for the story we tell ourselves, that we built this world, that we began from nothing and constructed civilization through our own ingenuity and labor. We built some of it. We built the most recent layer, the top layer, the layer that is still warm. But underneath our layer, under the concrete and the fiber optic cable and the steel and the glass, there are older layers, layers we did not build, layers we absorbed, repurposed, renamed, and then forgot that we had renamed. The ancient DNA doesn't lie. The acoustic geometry doesn't lie. The catenary curve in the wall of a nameless building in Bosnia doesn't lie. The word pre-existing in a bureaucratic caption from 1867 doesn't lie. They just don't speak very loudly. And for 150 years, the institutional framework of modern knowledge has been very, very good at not listening. Here is the question I want to leave with you. Not a question about the past, a question about right now, about today, about the room you are sitting in, and the street outside your window, and the city that surrounds you. When you walk through a very old building, when you stand in a nave and feel that low vibration move through your chest, when you stand in a specific courtyard and notice that the sound of the city disappears, when you look at a wall and feel, without being able to articulate why, that something about its proportions is not quite what you would have expected, what is that feeling? Is it aesthetic appreciation? Is it the historical imagination, projecting yourself backward? Or is it something else? Is it recognition? We inherit a world we did not make.
We live in structures we did not design, speak languages whose deepest grammatical logic was formed before our civilization began, carry in our bones the biological residue of migrations we have no record of. We think of ourselves as builders, creators, constructors of the present from the raw material of the past. But look at the ratio. Look at how much we have modified and how much we have simply moved into. Look at how much of what surrounds you was already there when your civilization arrived, was absorbed and renamed and classified and filed, and now is so deeply integrated into the fabric of your world that you no longer see it as anything other than background. We are not building a world. We are furnishing one. We are arranging our small, warm, recent things inside spaces whose geometry we did not calculate, whose resonance we did not design, whose walls were 2.4 meters thick before anyone thought to write down why. And somewhere in an archive that has been reorganized at least twice since the photograph was taken, in a folder marked with a word chosen specifically for its administrative neutrality, the record of who built it and when and for what purpose and with what knowledge is waiting. Not hidden, never hidden, just filed somewhere that no one has been funded to look.